Squirrels, the sun really came out today, which is nice. And what's going on today? It seems like there's a lot of stories about things getting banned and all that. How about this first one? What's about all these stories of drone fishing recently? Is it really that much of a thing? This one here says, drone fishing banned for its impact on biodiversity. In South Africa, manufacturers of drone fishing gear have just lost a court battle against the South African Department of Environment. The South African government believes that the use of motorized gear for angling increases pressure on certain threatened marine species. It is the end of a water-based hobby that endangers South Africa's fisheries resources. On 12th April of 2022, a court in Pretoria ruled against drone manufacturers who challenged a memo from the South African Department of the Environment banning the use of motorized gear in angling. After nearly 3 weeks of litigation, the court ruled in favor of South African government, which had been denouncing the negative impact of drone fishing on marine biodiversity for several years. Promoted since 2016 in South Africa by drone manufacturers, the use of motorized gear in angling also worries scientists. They cite effects such as the capture of endangered species, overfishing, and even conflicts between beachgoers and drone pilots. This new practice consists of hauling a line and bait with a drone so as to fish as far as possible while staying on the coast most of the time. The bait is released by the drone once the prey is located. The technique makes it possible to make large catches such as sharks, which are normally impossible to reach from the beach. So I don't know exactly what this data they're referring to is, but just that point where it says, and even conflicts between beachgoers and drone pilots, I don't think that's a valid reason per se in particular to say ban something in this type of scenario, because if there are people ignorant about a tech and they get into a fight with people saying, hey, you're quote spying on me, and then you're like, okay, we're just gonna ban it because that guy's paranoid, that's not a good reason to ban it in general. I would be more interested in the actual data. Like if they say, for example, it's overfishing or whatever, why couldn't you, just thinking about it, have a general rule say, doesn't matter what you use, you can't capture, I guess, this much fish, for example, or this and that type of species in particular because it's endangered. Wouldn't that just make more sense? Because with this, they've kind of mentioned how, I guess, sharks over there, like particular ones, are endangered. And it says in 2018, however, there were only 50 sightings. These sharks had disappeared from the horizon even during the months that usually constitute their peak presence. In 2 years, only one sighting has been confirmed in the area, according to the same study. Like there, it'd be interesting to see the actual data. You can't just make up, I guess, a conclusion saying, oh, I guess there's more people flying this, I don't know, quote, drone. This has to be like the answer 100%. That's the reason why there's less sharks and all that. Otherwise, these types of stories kind of reminds me of all those other ones, for example, where some people claim you fly a drone like what, 80 meters in the air, it gives like a whale a heart attack, or same thing as like a bear and so forth. Whereas there were studies done afterwards, like actually putting things like what, a heart monitor on a bear to show, hey, it gets used to it. Like I'd be more interested in actual data and studies like that, not just guessing like, oh, maybe this does this or that. Maybe that's the case, they have actually all the raw data, but it just doesn't sound like it from here. And in terms of things getting banned, this was everywhere here. This one says, Ottawa moves to ban handgun sales with sweeping new firearms control bill. The federal government is moving to freeze the sale of handguns in Canada as part of a sweeping new legislation it is calling the most significant effort to change gun laws in a generation. Is this related to that story in the US I heard with that mass shooting? It says the freeze could be implemented as early as this fall and would prevent purchase, sale, transfer, or importation of handguns, though individuals who already legally own handguns could still use them. In other words, we're capping the market for handguns. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said Monday while announcing the new measures. The freeze is part of Bill C-21, broad legislation tabled Monday that also revives elements of the government's most recent legislative effort, also known as C-21, to update gun laws. I actually remember reading this, where I mentioned before, I don't use a gun, but just from reading it, it didn't sound like it actually protected, let's just say, the mass majority of people. It felt like it ultimately took away people's rights to, I guess, use it legitimately, maybe in shooting ranges and so forth. And it says that bill failed to pass before the 2021 election. Provisions it included, which were brought back in the new bill, are red and yellow flags which restrict access to firearms to those deemed to be a danger to themselves or others. So what would you think? Is it good or bad? I know for me, I still have kind of the same mentality as before. Even though I don't use, for example, a gun and so forth, I have to look at it from a neutral standpoint, and from the sounds of it, again, it feels like it's targeting people who already do it legally. Because even for myself, I mentioned before, my perception of people owning a gun like here in Canada was they buy it, you can like, I don't know, carry it around and so forth, but apparently here it's super strict. Like for example, if someone owns it, they have to keep it locked away somewhere in the house. If you want to transport it, you have to literally take it just from one place to another. You can't just carry it around randomly, like out in the streets. For example, I assume that's what people could do in places like the US, correct? Like that's the perception that I had, and I would assume most people have. So I'm curious, like here, how does it actually protect people per se versus, let's just say, taking away people's rights? I mean, I have to think of it like that, because ultimately, if I say, yeah, whatever, don't care, take away their rights and all that, then I have nothing to say. When it comes to the other way around, let's just say if they come and say, oh, I'm gonna ban this and that because it's for your quote safety, and that group of people are arguing, what, there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, I can't say, yeah, don't do that, but do this. So there has to be some kind of common ground there. Although even I must admit, it sounds like they're really trying to take advantage of the situation politically to pass, I guess, this quote bill where you have like a tragic event and then all of a sudden you bring this up because I would assume you think, oh, I guess the mass majority sees like this piece of news, now's the time to implement this thing that we wanted to, even though it didn't pass before. That's what it sounds like anyways, personally. And I guess if that wasn't kind of odd enough, how about this one? This doesn't deal with, say, banning something. It's more like, I guess, decriminalizing it. And when it comes to like things like drugs, this one says, Canada announces decriminalization plan for drug users. British Columbians who possess up to 2.5 grams of illicit drugs for personal use will not be arrested or charged starting early next year as part of the province's request for an exemption from Canada's drug laws following a record number of overdose deaths. The 3-year exemption, effective January 31st, will apply to drug users 18 and over and include opioids, cocaine, methamphetamine, and MDA, also known as ecstasy. BC will become the first jurisdiction in North America to lift prohibitions on possession of small amounts of so-called hard drugs. In 2022, Oregon decriminalized such possessions, but the drugs were still subject to seizure, and those in possession faced a $100 US fine. So it's kind of like what? An upside down world now, I guess. Bans, all that stuff like what? Fishing drones and so forth, decriminalize drugs and all that. I mean, I can see the point here where it's probably way too much, I guess, arrests and so forth. Maybe it's not as productive based on their data, like maybe more people are killing themselves and all that, as they say, but still, I mean, if you're gonna be over the top on one end, how can't you be over the top here saying, oh, you quote decriminalize this, now there'll be more drug users, people are just carrying them randomly, taking it in school like it's nothing, for example. I mean, how can't you have, I guess, the same mentality in that sense? I mentioned before, it's hard to stay consistent, especially if you're trying to legitimately be, I guess, fair in most ways, per se. Alright, see you guys later.